Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. This time out, our special guest is Dannielle Robertson. Now, Dannielle is the daughter of Noel Boggs, a legendary lap steel player. Noel is well known for having played in Western swing bands, lots of Hollywood appearances, lots of studio appearances, and he also is closely associated with Leo Fender. In fact, Dannielle has brought with her a special guitar that was made specifically for Noel by Leo. Our Nick DiVirgilio sat down with Dannielle to discuss Noel, to discuss this special guitar, and lots more. I hope you enjoy the interview.
Hello everybody, I'm Nick DiVirgilio and I have a very special guest with me here today at Sweetwater. This is Miss Dannielle Robertson.
Hello.
Daughter of Noel Boggs, famed lap steel guitar player from back in the day.
Back in the day, indeed.
Did so much with this instrument, brought a style of music to the forefront that nobody was really doing in the past. So why don't we start from the beginning and give us a little bit of history of where your dad came from and your family and kind of how it all started.
I love to think of my dad as the original American man because he came from very humble beginnings in Oklahoma City. He was one of 3 children of a dirt farmer and a dairymaid. And from that, he walked out of Oklahoma City at age 15, a month before graduation from high school, and walked into a fabulous career.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't start that way. He actually was introduced to guitar when my uncle, his younger brother, was in hospital.
He was sick of surgery or something like this, right?
He'd been using a scythe and knocked his knee and became stiff-legged as a result, and he was in many surgeries. And so my grandmother bought a Sears Roebuck guitar, thinking that my dad, that the 2 boys could bond and learn the guitar. Well, my uncle had nothing to do with the guitar, but my dad was fascinated, and he was such a little tyke at the time, so he would stick it on his lap and he would play it that way. And later, as he grew, he realized that there was an actual guitar that was built. He had a Rickenbacker to start out.
Right.
And so he played not Hawaiian sound because he didn't like to replicate that, but he wanted to have his own sound and his own abilities.
The Hawaiian style was kind of the style of the lap steel at that time, right? I mean,
Exactly
that was
right.
kind of how
Yeah, it came from the islands, and they all played with a kind of a very mellifluous Hawaiian sound to it. And my dad was just alive with the sound of jazz at the time, and he took those kinds of things with him. And you must realize that music at this time, at the time that my dad was into performing, was all, he was with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, and he was with Hank Penny, and he had these Western leanings, but yet he always had this idea that he'd like to do jazz. And so with Jimmy Weibel, a trusted friend, and Leon McAuliffe, they really developed, all of them, a style that just spoke individually so that it addressed their personal desires and passions, but also their techniques. Sure. And so and that's how it started. He was just an amazing man. Absolutely integrity, work integrity, nonstop. Right. I mean, I grew up with that, so.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Western swing music kind of was born out of that whole
thing. It was, and you must realize that in those days there was only radio. Right. So we started with the Western singers, the Gene Autry's, the Roy Rogers, the Jimmy Wakely. All of them were singing cowboys, and my dad got his start with those background musics. And they couldn't hire actors and musicians, so they put all of the musicians in cowboy outfits. And so they would play, and then they'd say, oh, come on, Gene, let's go get the bad guys. And the musicians would drop their instruments and run and jump on a horse that they were not familiar with and ride off into the sunset to get the bad guys. Well, one day my dad thought it would be very funny to loosen all the cinches on the horses.
I read that. That's a funny story.
He was quite a jokester. And so after, when they would take the shot, they said, come on, Gene, and all the musicians would jump up, drop their instruments, get on the horses, and fell on the ground. My father thought it was hysterical, but I don't think that the first AD was very happy about the whole thing. So.
Great. So you, your father stayed around the center of the country, Oklahoma, and toured around. I read from Southeast, did a little stint in radio back in Oklahoma City. This is all before you guys actually moved out to Los Angeles.
Primarily, yes. And he was asked, Bob Wills had started his business again, had moved his business from Oklahoma City to the West Coast. And there was a lot happening on the West Coast. Television was coming into its prime. There was a station called KTLA on the West Coast. Still there today. And so Daddy had accepted a job with Hank Penny and Bob Wills, and then he got a call from Spade Cooley that Spade's big band was needing a guitar player, and I believe he was replacing Leon McAuliffe at the time. So we came on a troop train during the war. I was 6 months old, and we moved to California, to a little town called Linwood, and then ultimately Downey.
We have a little bit in common with the town of Downey. My mother was actually born in Downey, and you spent a good part of your
I grew up in Downey, yes, yes, indeed.
That was neat to read.
Yeah, it was fun.
So your dad was playing at the Hollywood Palladium, right, for a long time, and
he was.
in Santa Monica at the Venice Pier Ballroom, all these places?
He was not unlike every single musician or entertainer that we know.
Playing
is that you get a two-day gig, you get a 4-day gig, 6 weeks, whatever it is. The first 3 or 4 days, you're happy as a clam, you're employed, and then you're panicked what's going to be next.
Sure.
And so my dad was a sideman on a lot of different cuts, recordings. We used to do, when I was 4, we worked together. I was the opening act or the warm-up act for Gene Autry's radio program and for Jimmy Wakely's program. And so afterwards, we would go to lunch where my dad would do business at the Brown Derby in Hollywood. Oh, yeah. And we had lunch with Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra and all kinds of people.
All the bigwigs, yeah.
Yeah. And my dad played accompaniment on their recordings. So
that's amazing. You've had quite a career yourself too. I mean, with acting, and you're kind of born out of the family.
Well,
nice.
I like to say that I went into the family business. I was the middle child of 3.
Right.
And so my older brother wasn't interested. My younger sister was interested, but not dedicated to the work ethic that it took. And so I ended up in that. My father and mother both insisted that I get a good education, so I did.
Yeah.
But I love performing and still continue to do that to this day. So.
And we'll get back to a lot more stuff about the guitar and stuff too, but now you live in Indiana here, not too far from here in Sweetwater, right?
Yes, I live in a very small town. I moved from Southern California to a population of 304 in Leesburg, Indiana. I bought the house online. My daughter had moved here. I wanted to be part of that family.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I've been here 10 years. It's been not a culture shock, but I was thinking as I drove in how lovely it is to see the houses again without the foliage on all the trees. We in Indiana have so much that we don't have in California.
Sure.
And especially now with Sweetwater here, it's like, it's at home again.
Nice. Okay, let's get to some of the history about this guitar and your dad's involvement with this guitar. Your dad was very close to Mr. Leo Fender. And met Leo as playing in Southern California, right?
Yes, he did. When he started with the Cooley Band, my dad really decided that he had to have a step up from the guitars that he was using. He's used Gibsons, and it's not to say that they weren't excellent material, but with my dad's style, he didn't read music, and he had very special tunings, and he was able to jump from each of these necks to the other on the fly. Yeah. So, and he would embellish things because there wasn't music written for the electric steel guitar, and certainly not his brand of music. So they would say, you would hear on the old recordings, you'll hear Bob Wills say, "Okay, Papa, take it." And so there goes my dad, and he's off on some riff or another. This particular guitar was one of 8 that Leo custom built for my father. There was a great collaboration at that time because Leo was just starting his studio in Fullerton, and Freddie Tavares, the Hawaiian guitarist, was there. George White was there as a chief electrician and engineer. So there was this wonderful collaboration of artists, and Leo thought that it would be really good PR for him to send out emissaries with his work. So he gave everybody a guitar. Well, with my dad, because of his style, there were multiple guitars that were built just for him because he was about the only one that could play it. His last guitar, which was the alliteration way beyond this one, was a pedal guitar that had 16 chords, and my dad was able to manipulate it into 32 and do a lot of things with that one. This particular guitar I love because he and Leo fine-tuned it. They played with it all the time, and this was the workhorse guitar that he practiced with at home, that he recorded his last 3 albums on.
Amazing.
And that really, and we went on tour of the Orient with this one, a USO tour also.
Now this guitar was, I don't know if missing is the right word, but it was stored away. You had to go through a little bit of an adventure finding this guitar, didn't you?
Yes, we did. When my dad passed away, he was playing at a bar in Long Beach, and all of his equipment was still up. Oddly, at his passing, all of that disappeared. It was taken away, stolen. It was so I really felt that I needed a piece of my dad back, and so I contacted Les Barkas, who had Barkas Berry Recording Studio, where my dad had used this guitar last, and wanted to know if he knew where it was, because he had sold the studio. And he said, you know, I don't know, I put it in a broom closet. And so I said, well, was there a janitor there or anyone that cleaned up afterwards? And he said, well, here's the name of the janitor. So I called him, and this was after multiple phone calls. It wasn't as easy as that. It took me 14 years to find this baby.
That's a long time. That's a scavenger hunt and then some,
yeah,
isn't
it was a scavenger hunt, and I was the only child that was even interested in putting all of this together. And so when I made the call to this lovely gentleman, I said, well, I'm Sandy Boggs, I'm Noel's daughter. And he said, well, I wondered when you were going to call me. And I said, do you by any chance know the whereabouts of this Quad Stringmaster that my dad used, the blonde one? And he said, I sure do, it's underneath my bed. And he says, I've been waiting all these years for someone from your family to call me. He said, come and get it.
That's amazing.
Can you imagine?
Sure, I can't.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
It was lovely. So I drove the 100 miles and offered to pay him, and he declined. He said, you know, I really admired your father. I loved what he stood for as a man and what he was as an artist. And so I burst into tears, loaded the guitar in, and drove home.
Wow.
So I'm glad to have it back. Even though it's in somewhat of an interesting state and rather fragile at this time of its life, it's wonderful to have a piece of him with me again.
Course.
And to know what this represented. Now I must say to you that he did not like the blonde wood. This was a battle that he had with Leo over the blonde wood. My father liked the dark woods. And you will see in a lot of the things on YouTube that you see my dad playing, and certainly with the Cooley Band, everything was dark. It was dark wood. Don't know why, it was just his preference.
Now, how did you know that this guitar was the one that you guys took to the Orient and all those things happened with? How did you find the history of that?
On the tweed case that it came in, there's a tiny little piece of tape that says Hawaii on it, and that was the first leg of our journey. And I do remember this particular guitar because I stood next to it all the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Your father played on over 2,000 recordings, right? He did a lot of movie soundtrack music. The few things that I saw on YouTube of your dad playing, he played this like a regular lap steel, was able to groove and play chords and comp and all of that stuff in solo, but he also did crazy sound effects with these guitars. Was able to manipulate the sounds in really unique ways. And
it always amazed me, the people that would call our home in Downey. And we got this call one day from a gentleman who identified himself as Cecil B. DeMille. I knew the name, and I said to my dad, I said, this is an important call, I think you should take it. And so Mr. DeMille had asked him to come and do sound effects for War of the Worlds. And for, my dad did a ton of those with him. And so my dad asked me if I wanted to go to the studio with him to watch it. And I said, sure, love to. And so my dad did a lot of pinging sounds, they would just say, okay, we're rolling tape, give us some noise, give us some sound. So he would do slides and pinging sounds. And then they added a blowtorch. They literally brought a blowtorch in, added that as an underbed of audio to my dad's guitar. And it was magic. And it was one of those things where my dad said, you always be on time, you never be a problem, you always be facile, you always work more than whatever anyone asks you to do. You raise the bar on your own talent, and then the next time you work, you exceed that. And because he was that way, people just loved to work with him.
Sure.
Yeah, so, yeah, Cecil B. DeMille was one. He did War of the Worlds, he did Greatest Story Ever Told, The Parting of the Red Sea, and I don't really know if any of the other steel guitar players at the time had this kind of a run on the instrument, because it wasn't normal for this instrument to do that. But again, you had Noel Boggs, and always pushing the envelope, always raising the bar, and always an adventurer.
Did he get the same kind of enjoyment doing the movie kind of soundtrack, weirder music as he did playing his Western swing songs?
You know, I can only surmise that he did from his behavior, because he would, he and I were both gigglers and laughers, and so he was always sort of not sure that he had done quite the right thing until he would hear the audio playback and he'd say, oh, that doesn't sound like a steel guitar. Exactly. So that was a good thing for him. I think that he was proud of the things that he did, but I think he took it all in stride, quite frankly. Yeah. So.
Now you brought this guitar here to Sweetwater. You had the technicians check it out, and they've actually got it all to work, I hear. And not that you're going to play it, but it's back in working shape.
Yeah, the wonderful thing about Sweetwater is not only are they the finest in the area, probably in the world at this point, in knowing all kinds of guitars, but they really listen to you. And when I said to them, I would really sort of like it if you didn't clean it up and make it all shiny new again, because it has my dad's fingerprints on it and things like that. And I was curious to see in what working order it was. And also we wanted to remove one of the tuning beds to see if it was signed, because Leo signed all of my dad's
apparently
guitars.
there's some notes, some working notes underneath the tuning pegs and stuff.
Yeah, written in red pencil. It's typical.
Some great history in this instrument here. It's amazing.
Yes, and the thing that's so nice about it is that this is two generations away from what's happening now. And I think that if young people, musicians learning to play, or those that are still playing, know the history of this machine and know the history of my dad and hear his recordings, it could only help the growth of the instrument itself and their own talents. When I first came here, the day that I first brought the guitar in here, I drug it in, and this darling young man, young to me, everyone is young, ran up and he goes, "That's a Fender guitar, right?" And I said, "Yes, it is. How did you know?" And he said, "From the tweed case." And he said, "What's inside?" I said, "A Quad Stringmaster." And he said, oh my gosh, may I see it?" So we opened it up and he looked and he said, "Oh, this is amazing." He says, "Is this yours?" And I said, "To a degree, it was my dad's." "Who's your dad?"
Right.
Noel Boggs. And he goes, "Oh my gosh." He said, "Well, I'm Dave Amato from REO Speedwagon." He said, "I know your dad's music and I really love his chord changes and his patterns of sound." And he said, "Let me show you my collection of guitars." And he pulled out his phone and showed me, and I thought, thank you, because here we have another generation that's making music and is learning. And if my dad could know that he was part of that legacy, my goodness, he and Leo both are smiling.
Of course. That's a wonderful story. We really appreciate you coming down. Is there anything you want to add?
No, except keep the music flowing.
Well, that'll definitely keep happening for sure. Thank you so much for telling us your story, showing us the guitar. Wonderful to meet you.
And thank you, Dad.
For sure. Thanks for watching this interview, everybody. I'm Nick DiVirgilio.